Everybody, this is Will and Cooper from EFF, and they are going to be talking about detecting fake 4G base stations. And this is really incredible work. This is a problem that is essentially an impossible problem. I've worked on it before with doing MC catching. It is really, really hard, and what they have done is absolutely incredible. So please, thank you for telling us about it here at last ShmooCon. So Will and Cooper, please take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for waking up early and coming down here to join us this morning. As John said, who was formerly my boss, I'm Cooper, and this is Will. We are at EFF. I'm a senior staff technologist at EFF, where I've been for 10 years, and I started out working on Privacy Badger there, and now look at things like state-sponsored malware, street-level surveillance technologies, our Threat Lab project to defend at-risk people from digital surveillance, and of course, phone technology, which is what we're going to be talking about today.
Hey, I'm Will Greenberg. I'm also a staff technologist who is senior as of this week at EFF. Thank you so much. So I primarily work on CertBot, investigating the data broker industry, and also police use of surveillance on the street and in the carceral system.
Cool. So today, we're going to talk about Stingrays, aka MC catchers, aka cell site simulators. I'm probably going to use these terms interchangeably. Feel free to throw smorgasbords at me if you feel like, but whatever. We all use these terms kind of interchangeably. So we started looking at cell site simulators when we got a call from some people in Mandan, North Dakota, who were protesting a large oil pipeline, the water protectors down there, in 2016. And they had been using some apps to detect cell site simulators, which had been giving them indications that maybe there were some cell site simulators running on the ground there to surveil what they were doing. We thought that was really interesting because at EFF, we're not big fans of police using surveillance technology on people exercising their First Amendment rights to protest. So I went down to the protests in North Dakota and brought a bunch of equipment with me, a bunch of phones with apps, some SDRs, and a couple of other things. And what I learned was that I had no idea what I was doing. The apps were giving me all sorts of alerts that I couldn't possibly hope to interpret. Location area update, what the fuck does that mean? And I was getting, traces of the radio spectrum with the SDRs, but I also had no idea how to interpret those. So back to the drawing board. Let's think about how we can do this better and actually analyze this evidence. So we came up with 3 goals. The first goal was to determine how often cell site simulators are being used, and specifically how often they're being used to surveil protests. Determine what kind of attacks modern cell site simulators are using, because hey, we have 4G now. And also to figure out if we can detect cell site simulators reliably. So the first question is the easiest one. How often are cell site simulators being used? We have pretty good evidence that foreign spies are using them. The government and various government contractors have put out reports about MC catchers being found in DC and around the White House. We know that cyber mercenaries like NSO Group are using them to deliver their malware, thanks to excellent reporting from Amnesty USA. And we know from FOIA requests that law enforcement is using them. ICE and DHS have several dozen cell site simulators, which they're reportedly using hundreds of times per year. And even local law enforcement is in on the game. So Santa Barbara and a suburb of Santa Barbara, Fontana, used their cell site simulators hundreds of times, 231 in 2017, 160 in 2022. Certainly there aren't that many murderers and kidnappings in Santa Barbara, even though it is Santa Barbara. That's a California joke, and I shouldn't joke about Southern California right now. Anyway, but they're also being used by criminals. There was this MC catcher that was being driven around the streets of Paris that everybody thought was a bomb and caused a huge bomb scare in downtown Paris a couple years ago. But it turns out it was actually being used for an SMS phishing scam based on health insurance. They were trying to collect people's health insurance data to do some sort of further scam. But this was a very rudimentary MC catcher that they were just driving around the streets with. So the next question we wanted to answer, how do 4G cell-site simulators work? What are the vulnerabilities in the modern stack that we think are being taken advantage of? So my colleague at the time, Yamna, and I sat down and read all of the academic literature for like a year on every attack that had been carried out against 4G. And Yamna wrote this really excellent white paper called Gotta Catch 'Em All for EFF that goes over all of the various attacks that we came up with. And I'm going to take, before I get into what we found there, I'm going to take a break to just give you a quick overview of cell technology. So this is acronym hell, and I'm so sorry. A lot of these acronyms are sub-nested acronyms with other acronyms in them. But basically, you have the phone, or the device, which is called the UE, or user equipment. The user equipment, or phone, connects to the eNode B, which is the base station, or the tower. And then the towers connect to the sort of back end, the enhanced packet core, which has the mobility engine, all of the like authentication and billing stuff like that. We really, for our purposes, only care about the connection between the phone, or the UE, and the towers, the eNode B. So that's all you really have to care about for this talk. And then the protocol for what happens between the phone and the tower is summarized here. I'm sure this is a very readable slide for all of you. But basically, you have a couple of layers. Over the physical, you have the radio resource control, which handles like negotiating your connection with the tower, like connecting to the tower, finding out what frequency it's on, things like that. And then you have the NAS, which is the non-access stratum, which is about like authentication, attaching to the service, and doing all that stuff. And what we figured out in our research is that even though 4G had made a lot of improvements over 2G, for example, now the phone and the tower have to mutually authenticate, and the phone has to decide that the tower has the right cryptographic keys, it has a glass jaw. There are a ton of messages that get sent and received and parsed before and trusted before authentication ever happens, or without any authentication ever happening. And you can even do downgrade attacks in that window and say, sorry, downgrade to 2G. This is still prevalent in 5G. In 5G, you can downgrade to 4G, and then you get to 4G, and you can downgrade to 2G. It's awesome. So all of the attacks happen in this window, basically, in the RRC and in the NAS. That's where the vast majority of cellular network attacks happen. So then we looked at detection, and there were some previous efforts to detect cell-site simulators. There's two broad categories. The first is app-based, things like Android MC Catcher Detector, Snoop Snitch, Darshark. And the strengths of these are that they're cheap. They're free if you already have a rooted Android phone, or if you have a compatible Android phone that you can root. And they're easy to use. All you got to do is install an app and look for what sorts of alerts it gives up. The weaknesses of these, though, is that there's limited data. You're limited to what you can get from the Android API, or in Snoop Snitch's case, they were using the same DIAG protocol that we are, but they were still limited amounts of data they could get. Did my mic just get quieter? All right, can you all still hear me? Okay, sweet. But you got lots of false positives with these apps, was my experience in the field, and possibly some false negatives as well. The other category is radio-based things, and these are like Sitch or Overwatch, which was a device that was being sold to the U.S. government here for a while, or CGLAS, which is a project out of University of Washington, run by our board member Yoshi Kono. And the strengths of those are that you can get better data because you can have a lot of sensors all over the city. You can get lower level information because you can get like physical information about the like shape of radio traffic, what the signal to noise ratio is, how strong it is, do new towers show up, et cetera, et cetera. Weakness is that it's harder to set up. You got to set up a bunch of SDRs all over the city. It's harder to use because you got to, use an SDR. And you got to buy all this hardware, right? And you can't transmit because the FCC frowns upon that sort of thing. But the big problem with all of these that we saw was that all previous detections only focused on 2G. And the Stingray worked natively on 2G, but 2G is long gone, and nobody buys the Stingray anymore. In fact, L3Harris stopped selling to local police because local police kept screwing it up and ending up with all of their documents showing up in court. So now, KeyW, which recently got bought by Jacobs Technology, former ShmooCon sponsor, KeyW was, not Jacobs. KeyW and other companies have started building 4G native IMSI catchers. So we need to be looking natively on 4G for 4G attacks. So can we detect 4G IMSI catchers? And can we improve on the previous attempts? Well, we came up with what we thought at the time was a good idea. And we named this project Crocodile Hunter because even though we're on 4G, we're going after stingrays. Stingrays killed Steve Irwin. Taking one back from my man, Steve. So Crocodile Hunter had a hardware stack that looked like this. It was a Edis B200 or a Blade RF software-defined radio, Linux, GPS, and a couple of antennas. And then the software stack, what we were doing was basically emulating a mobile phone on the SDR and then looking at all of the towers in the area, looking at the RRC packets they were sending, and sort of logging those and then looking for trying to approximate the location of those towers. And this was the UI I developed because I used too much command line. And here, we put a little orange dot for every tower that we located that we thought was legitimate. And we put a little black skull for every tower that we thought was suspicious. This is a run we did in downtown San Francisco during the Dreamforce conference in 2019. And I don't actually think there are dozens of IMSI catchers just hanging out on the streets of San Francisco. So there were some flaws in our detection methods because basically what we were doing was looking for towers that weren't in open source databases. And it turns out those open source databases are incomplete as much as they are lovely. And new cell towers just pop up all the time. People put in femtocells. People put in cells on wheels and temporary cell towers and all those sorts of things. So we went back to the drawing board. The other problems here was that it was really expensive. You had to buy an expensive, like $400 or $500 SDR to run this software, which was outside of the realm of what most journalists could do. It was too hard to set up. You had to, Python, compile some C, run Linux, right? Again, it's not a thing that journalists want to do, and journalists were who I wanted using this. And it was too difficult to interpret the results for a layperson, right? Like all those black skulls. Oh my God, there's 50 IMSI catchers in downtown San Francisco. No, there's not. That's not what we want you to come away with this. So can we do better? Will, can we do better?
We'll see. Is this mic actually on, by the way? Can you? Okay, great. Yeah, so this project Rayhunter started when Cooper found out from Matthew Garrett that there was this cheap $20 mobile hotspot called the Orbic that was very easily rooted, ran the Qualcomm baseband, which was a fairly well understood chip to be reverse engineered. And we decided that, hey, this might be a cheap device. This might be a cheap device that the average journalist or activist could afford. And if we just made it relatively easy to install bit of software, we might be able to use this for kind of a Crocodile Hunter 2.0. Thanks, yeah. Maybe I'll just use this one. There we go. Okay. So we aim to make this as easy to install as possible and to make as easy to interpret a UI as possible. So we're actually looking at the UI here. You're looking at mostly just the normal Orbic UI here. This is just what you would see if you booted up this device straight from Amazon. But at the top of the screen, you should see a hopefully inconspicuous green line. That's Rayhunter saying everything's fine. We haven't detected an IMSI catcher. And that line will turn red when, hey, we may have detected some sort of heuristic that indicates an IMSI catcher might be around. We also wrote this thing in Rust because the device is fairly hardware limited, and we wanted to have a good handle on memory pressure, also because we like Rust. And a note on the name, we wanted to kind of keep the stingray-oriented theme here, and we found that orcas actually hunt stingrays en masse in nature, using a strategy called wave hunting, which we thought was sick. Wave hunter is unfortunately trademarked. Orca also trademarked, as like a dozen other ideas that we came up with, just unavailable. So we went with Rayhunter, because that's what it does. Also, because this is just a Linux device, you can just dump arbitrary RGB values to the frame buffer. So that's how we have that green line. We just read in the frame buffer, overwrite the top line with green or red, and that's that. And since this thing is also like a mobile hotspot, a Wi-Fi hotspot, you can connect it with your laptop and just go to a web server where we're serving a slightly improved UI. And you can tell we're software engineers because our idea of a UI is just dumping JSON into a pre-tag. But this is, this will show you all of the recordings that this device has taken, also give you links to download the PCAP files from each recording and a QMDL file. And I'll cover what both of those are for in a bit. And so our goals with sort of the next generation Crocodile Hunter was we wanted this to be something that we could very easily deploy to people who are not, technically proficient, because then we can gather as much data as possible, because there's lots of unknowns about how MC catchers are used. A lot of the numbers that Cooper was citing earlier come from just kind of FOIA requests where we happen to get information about how these things are being used, but data is pretty scant. So yeah, by sort of democratizing this approach, our hope is to get a lot more data to make research easier. So how this thing works, and I hinted at this earlier, is that it uses the Qualcomm baseband, and this device is running kind of a modified version of Android that almost has all the things that Android should have, but specifically it exposes this dev diag file, which is how you access what's called the Qualcomm diag protocol, which is this diagnostic protocol that's not publicly documented anywhere, but we'll go into that in a bit. And basically tells it to start logging all of the radio frames that the device is receiving. So then the Rayhunter software just captures that in real time, looks for anomalies in the frames, and then reports to the user over the screen or the web UI. And from the user's perspective, after it's installed, you can just turn the device on. It's running automatically then, and you just throw it in your backpack or in your pocket, go about your day, and then just check it periodically. And if the line's red, you should be concerned. This is an example of one of the PCAP files that you can download from one of these traces. And this is something that is just, it's built into Wireshark, the ability to dissect LTE data. So that was very handy for us. This is an example of a in the wild captured PCAP file. Nothing suspicious is going on here, just to give you a demonstration of what this data kind of looks like. So this is one of those RRC messages that Cooper was mentioning earlier. And here it's basically instructing, this is the tower, it's a downlink message, so it's coming from the tower to the device. And it's instructing the device to switch to this ciphering algorithm, which in this case, a reasonable thing to do. It's a well-known and I suppose not terrible cipher. So how this actually works is there is this not public diag protocol, but thankfully the lovely people at ShmooCon have documented it quite thoroughly. And also one of the detector projects, Snoop Snitch, has a daemon that taps into this and does exactly what we wanted to do. So we had a lot of prior work to base Rayhunter on, which we're very, very thankful for. And all you do with this file, it's just a file on the file system. You open it, you throw an ioctl at it saying, hey, I want to enable logging. Then you just start spewing some of these serialized bits of binary data saying, I want to log RRC messages, NAS messages, just the whole mask of the frames that you would like logged. And then you just start reading it on a loop. And everything that comes out after the fact will be these frames that have one or more of these radio messages. And in Rust, the way we do this is with this lovely crate that I love called Deku. It's I have an example here, yeah. Declarative parsing library. So what that means is you can just sort of define the structs that you want to serialize or deserialize, throw in some of these magic Deku procedural macros that you see on the left. And it will just make 2 bytes and from bytes methods along with a bunch of other things. It's wonderful. I use it all the time. So I won't dwell on this too much, just in case there's not many Rust speakers. But basically, this is saying, hey, I've got a request that you can detect because it has a number 115 of a 115 byte in the first byte. And if you see that, then descend into this log config request enum, which itself has 2 variants based on the number that follows it. And so you can just see this is from our unit tests, whether or not we're able to serialize one of these diag requests. So this is my attempt at a diagram showing kind of the flow of data through Rayhunter. So it starts at the far left, this dev diag file. And so once we've enabled logging, we're just reading it on a loop and dumping all of the raw data that we get from it before we even parse or handle it at all into the QMDL file. And as far as we can tell, this is just the way that Qualcomm natively stores this diagnostic information is just it dumps the bytes into a QMDL file. And this is super handy because after the fact, after you've done a recording, even if you have a very early version of Rayhunter with maybe the very primitive heuristics that we had at the beginning, this QMDL file is kind of a upstream source of truth of what that recording was. You can run any prior version of Rayhunter on it and then test new heuristics on it. And so after we decode the frames, we can throw them into one of the PCAP files that I mentioned earlier. And the way, if you haven't written or dealt with PCAP files in the past, you can just dump data into it, and then Wireshark's dissectors will actually do all the parsing for you. So no processing is needed to create those PCAP files. It's very fast. And then finally is the part that Rayhunter is actually interesting for, the parsing and the heuristics. So like Cooper was mentioning, these RRC and NAS messages are where most of these attacks will take place. Great news about RRC is that it's well-defined using ASN1, the abstract syntax notation that plenty of other cryptographic protocols and other things are written in. It's sort of like a formalized grammar of how you serialize and deserialize data. And because of that, you can just generate a parser for an ASN1 file. So we did that, and it's like 10,000 lines long. It's crazy. But we can, as a result, parse RRC messages and run our heuristics directly on them in the Rayhunter code. NAS is not. It's just this big bag of tabular data. It seems like it has been formalized in something called CSN1, which is ASN1's, terrible cousin. It's not, the tooling around it isn't like well developed. As far as I can tell, this is something that we would love input on if anyone has more knowledge about this. As a result, we can't generate a parser for it, and we would have to hand roll one, which would take a tremendous amount of time and expertise to do. So currently, we don't have any NAS parsing in Rust. We are instead using this fantastic Python package called PyCrate. Python doesn't run on this device very well, so this happens offline on the laptop after the fact. So currently, we can't actually parse NAS, one major limitation. So this is basically every one of our heuristics is written using this Rust trait. So suppose that one of you wanted to write a heuristic, all you would have to do is basically write something that implements this trait, which basically gives a user-friendly name and description for what it's looking for. And then for every frame that comes from the diag file, it's run on this analyze information element method. So information element is just kind of this master enum of like RRC, NAS, any other LTE message that we have runs through this. And the idea is that a heuristic will either return nothing if it doesn't detect anything suspicious, or it'll return one of our events, which an event could be just an informational log message or an actual warning with some severity associated with it. And the heuristics that we've written so far are the downgrade attack that Cooper mentioned earlier. This is, this was, I think, one of the most promising heuristics at the start of this. We have never actually seen this in the wild, although as of yesterday, we found out that we're actually not checking the right thing for this. It's kind of a pattern.
We're checking the right thing. It's that we're not checking all of the right things. There
Yes.
are multiple ways to do downgrades, and we're only checking for one of them.
Yeah. So our heuristics also need work. We're not telecom experts. I didn't know anything about telecom before this project. But as a result, we haven't actually seen evidence of a downgrade attack in the wild yet, given our heuristic. There's also a null cipher check that we have. In 4G, you can basically, the cell can tell your phone, use the null cipher. Don't actually encrypt anything. And your phone will say, gotcha. We haven't actually seen this one in the wild yet. It seems extremely unreasonable that this would ever happen except in an attack. And then finally, the most promising thing that we have now is this IMSI attach message, which Cooper will go into a little bit more.
Yeah. So the IMSI attach message is really interesting. Basically, there's a message in NAS. There's a message in NAS that the tower can request your identity. It can, and specifically, it can request your IMSI. And there's a lot of ways where your phone might send the IMSI to the tower. And some of them happen a lot under sort of normal circumstances, which is not great. Not great design. But some of them don't happen under normal circumstances. So we tried a couple approaches to this. First, we were looking at paging messages from the tower with your IMSI, but it turns out that's a thing that happens a lot under normal circumstances and would only be useful for an IMSI catcher if somebody was trying to actually track your location, not if and therefore already knew your IMSI, not if somebody was trying to get your IMSI for the first time to identify who you are, which is what we're more concerned about. The other thing that happens is sometimes your phone just decides to attach to a tower by its IMSI for no particular reason, because it doesn't think it has a valid temporary IMSI, or because it just isn't really sure what's going on. Again, this is a thing that at first we thought was very suspicious, but then we realized happens all the time. For example, if you're on T-Mobile, like I am, and you're out of range of all T-Mobile towers, like I am right now, your phone will just try connecting to any tower around it promiscuously and saying, here's my IMSI. Does anybody want my IMSI? Will somebody please give me service? So it's, again, Not a great heuristic, although it is a great attack for an MC catcher to pull off because it's hard to detect. But we came up with a better test, which is for this attack that I call the wallet inspector attack. So for those of you who watched The Simpsons, there's basically this episode where Homer's going to college and Snake, the criminal guy, walks up to these three nerds on campus and he's like, wallet inspector. And they all pull out their wallets and they're like, here you go. I think you'll find these to be in order. And then he takes their wallets and runs away with them. That's basically what the tower is doing. So it walks up to the phone and says, IMSI inspector. And the phone goes, yes, here's my IMSI. You'll find this to be in order. And then the tower goes, kick rocks, get off my tower, and runs away. And then your phone goes back to the normal tower that it's been on the whole time. It turns out, we don't think happens under normal circumstances ever. We've, in fact, only in all of our testing, all of our controls, and everything, only seen this happen a couple of times in the wild. There is one false positive for this, which is that sometimes right when you turn your device on for the first time after several days, even a legit network will have no idea what your device is based on the IMEI, and so it will send an IMSI request. So if it happens in the first 100 packets right after you've turned your device on, that's a false positive, and we don't look for that. But if it happens in the middle of your run, it's pretty goddamn suspicious. So we did some simulated attack testing with some folks at Cape, who's a secure mobile company. This isn't a sponsor talk. They got a table out there. Go talk to them. They're cool. But they generously agreed to build an IMSI catcher for us and run it in their office and test it on one of these devices. So they did a couple of tests. They tested the tricking the phone into doing an attach request, and we were able to see that. And they were also able to do the wallet inspector attack, where the tower sends an identity request. I request your IMSI, and the phone goes, yes, here is my IMSI. So this was excellent because they were actually able to poke a lot of holes in our early heuristics and our early detection methods, show us why we had false positives, and now we have an actual sort of positive control of here's what and we have a good reason to believe that this is exactly what the attack is that's being used by commercial IMSI catchers. So this is a good positive control for us. We have a simulated attack. We can try to think about ways. And we're doing more simulating different types of attacks with them as well. And we've also started field testing. So one of our EFF supporters reached out to us and said he wanted to run one of these down at the border because he works down there, lives down there, and he's not the type of guy that DHS cares about because they're racists. So I'm sure some of you are fine people. So he took a Rayhunter device down along the border and did his work down there and wandered along. And what we found down there so far is nothing. Bummer. It turns out that the border's, yay, maybe? I don't know. It turns out that the border's a really big place, and there's a lot of desert down there. And we think this is good because, A, it says we don't have many false positives. We might have some false negatives. But B, we can keep doing this, and he can keep collecting data, and as we come up with better heuristics, better tests, we can rerun those against the old data and see if we do find something in the future. But we have found things. So earlier this year, Dhruv Matora at Wired took a Rayhunter device to the DNC. And at the time, we didn't find anything. Our heuristics were trash. We wrote a new heuristic 3 days ago for this wallet inspector attack. And we reran it on the heuristics, and what we found was somebody was doing the wallet inspector attack at the DNC. It showed up exactly one time, pretty near to a hotel where delegates were staying. And yeah, we have the exact attack where the tower requests the IMSI, the phone says, here's my IMSI, and then the tower says, nope, no service for you, kicks it off, and then it goes back to a legit tower. But the tower that it was connected to, it was an AT&T SIM. It was connected to an AT&T tower before, during, an AT&T tower during the attack, and then an AT&T tower after the attack. So there's no reason why this should have happened in a legitimate scenario. This is not a smoking gun. We can't for sure say there was an IMSI catcher at the DNC. But we think that it's pretty strong evidence that leads us to think that it was likely. We don't know who was running it either. It could have been US government, it could have been espionage, it could have been somebody fucking around, right? Unclear. A friend of ours, Andy Cara, also did some field testing. Hi, Andy. Also did some field testing last year at ShmooCon when we had first developed this. He took one of our devices and wandered down, I've totally dry snitched on you now. And wandered down the street where all the embassies are in Washington, D.C. Again, at the time, we didn't find anything because our heuristics were trash. But we reran it again on Wednesday after we had developed this new heuristic for the wallet inspector attack, and found one time where suddenly a bunch of really shady shit happened. So the towers all around him at this point start sending out location area updates. So basically, like, what they are doing is tricking the phone into thinking it has suddenly jumped hundreds of miles and needs to reconfigure itself. Then we get an identity request message, wallet inspector attack, identity response with the IMSI. Then we get a UE identity cannot be derived. Phone identity can't be derived. Weird, because that's the identity. How could it not be derived? And then we get kicked off the tower. Kind of makes sense that one of these would be near an embassy. Unfortunately, we don't know which embassy we were at because I lost the location data of where Andy was. Womp womp. Luckily, I'm in DC again, so we can just run this test again and see what happens. So we still have lots to do. We are not done with this work yet. We want to do more testing with simulated attack environments. If any of you have software-defined radios at home and want to build an MC catcher and run some attack tests, we would love to take a look at those PCAPs. We promise we won't tell the FCC. Don't violate any FCC regulations, or at least if you do, don't tell me that you did. We want to do more user testing, right? We're not UX experts. We're Linux users. We want to get this into the hands of a lot of people, especially people who, like, this is not their forte, right? We want to get this into all of your hands. We want to get this also into the hands of people who are not hackers, right? People who are journalists, people who are doing other work, activists, human rights defenders, right? So we want to do a lot more user testing to make sure that our UI is as good as it can be and to make sure that we're not sending any false positives. We want to write more heuristics, right? We want to have more tests. We have some ideas. We are open to other ideas. If you have thoughts about this, again, we're not telecom experts, so we do not know everything, right? And then on-device NAS parsing, of course, is something we really want. We do have one NAS parser on device for the wallet inspector attack, but it's a very limited, like, we can only look for that and that's it. So having a full NAS parser would be super nice. And yeah, we want your help. If you know people who would be interested in testing this, so this device can be bought on Amazon for 20 bucks. It's a $20 device. You can order the device from Amazon, download our install script from GitHub, and run it and throw it in your pocket, and you're done. We want you all to test this. Or if you know any phone experts who can help us come up with good heuristics, that would be excellent. Or if you have a bunch of communities that you're a part of, especially like in other countries or communities that are highly at risk here in the US, and you want to distribute these among them and help us coordinate that and like helping people interpret the results and getting the data, we're very interested in that. And I want to end with some advice from my kid. So when I was saying goodnight, so this is my son, River, he's 5.5. When I was saying goodnight to him last night, calling him on the phone and saying goodnight to him, and he was like, Dad, what's your talk about tomorrow? So I was kind of trying to explain it in terms he could understand. Well, there's spies that, like, in some places that kind of want to spy on our phones and see what we're doing. And so, like, me and my colleague have come up with a way to try to detect that and stop that from happening. And he thought about it for a second, and he was like, Dad, why don't you just tell those hackers to turn off their phones? Which, honestly, great fucking advice, kid. You nailed it. And then he made me promise that I would say that at the end of my talk and put a picture of him in my slides. So here we are. I'll tell him he got a big round of applause. He's going to love that. And finally, acknowledgements. We stand on the shoulders of giants with all this work. There's no such thing as an InfoSec rock star. We all help each other out. So thanks to Sang-Wook Bae and Rudy Wang at CAPE for helping testing and thinking about heuristics. Thanks for Matthew Garrett for rooting the Orbic and letting us know that it had the diag adapter on it. Thanks to Andy Kara and the whole Wiggle team. Thanks to Russ and Dragorn for advice and testing. Of course, our EFF colleagues for advice, field testing, and generally being awesome. Thanks to Gary Miller, Yoshi Kono, Alex Gantman, Subrato Day, Alex Ross, and Bradley Reeves for advice and connections. And OsmoClom and QC Super and Snoop Snitch for being the giants upon whose shoulders we stood. Thank you to Yamna for all her work at EFF and wherever she is now, better understanding and protecting against cell site simulators. And finally, thanks to EFF and our colleagues for supporting this work and generally being amazing. And last but certainly not least, thank you to all the EFF members who, through their donations, support this work. We could not do it without you. Thank you so much. If you're not familiar with EFF before this, go check out our booth out there. We're a nonprofit and we work for tips. So, and finally, thanks to Heidi, Bruce, and ShmooCon for all the memories. This is really the best con, and I'm so honored to be able to speak at the last. And this is actually Will's first time talking at a hacker conference. So give it up for Will. Sweet, we ended early. Yeah. And thanks to all of you. This is the GitHub where you can go download this project or check it out. And yeah, come find us after the talk or ask us questions up at the booth, at the EFF booth later. Thanks, everyone.